Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, at the end of the day, life has to be what you make of it. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, influences, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm assuming you do. You're listening to the podcast right now. You can subscribe to the podcast. That would be super. You can find us basically wherever you find your podcasts. Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. It's all good. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. Also, it would be great if you'd follow us on social media. You can do that at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please give us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where we talk about all the latest and greatest from the worlds of television, film festivals, video on demand, anything and beyond, really. Anything about the moving image. We love talking about it, and we love it when you read about it. So please come on by. On this episode, the onslaught of Hot Docs coverage continues, which is running online until May 9th. It is the Hot Docs Canadian International Documentary Festival. You can find out more over at hotdocs.ca. But on this one, we're looking at the film Dropstones, which has had its world premiere as a part of the festival. And it's it's an interesting little POV thing. It's sort of fly on the wall, but it follows a subject who returns to the Fogo Islands after getting out of an abusive relationship, and she has her two sons with her, and she wants to raise them to be good men, and it's sort of the journey of rediscovering your roots and rediscovering what makes you you, and sort of really sort of embracing sort of the qualities of an area that you're in. And it's an interesting little piece of Canadian cinema, and we had the distinct pleasure of talking with writer-director Caitlin Durak about the inspiration for the film, how she found her subject, and the whole 9 yards. But it is an excellent little film, which I do recommend checking out over at Hot Docs. But first, I hope you enjoy our talk with Caitlin right now, because it's a good one. Obviously, just, first off, I just want to say thank you very much for the time today. I appreciate it.
Oh, and thank you for taking a look at my film. I really appreciate that.
Well, I guess my first question is just walk me through how you found Sonia, because I was really struck by just, I guess, how observational it was, because I can imagine for you as a filmmaker there might be an attempt to sort of steer the ship a little bit, but I really did get the sense that you were very laid back on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Sonia and I actually worked together briefly at the Fogo Island Inn back in 2015, I believe. I had a friend who was a bar manager there, and over the course of the summer, they were really short-staffed, so I helped out for a couple of weeks. And Sonia's just one of those people that everybody gravitates towards, including all of the guests. And as we became friends, I got to know more about her life there, and of course was just taken with her personality, and we became friends. And I guess that's where a lot of the intimacy that perhaps you're referring to came from, is just feeling really comfortable with each other.
So I guess it wasn't too much of a sell, because obviously as a documentarian, like you're filming everything.
The first time I actually went to make the movie, I didn't film with anybody my first trip. That was my second time back to the island. So Sonia and I were already friends. And it was still really just trying to convince her that this is something that we should do together. And then I can't remember exactly if there was like a turning point where she said, okay, yeah, let's do this. I think it was more just, I talked to her a lot about how I wanted to focus on the women of Fogo Island and the kids of Fogo Island, and what life is actually like there, not just sort of what the tourists see. And And so she said, sure. And then once I came over with my camera, probably after the kids kind of got used to the idea of it and I let them play around with it a bit and stuff, um, it was like they just didn't notice after a while. Like there was a point where I also like lived with them for periods of time too.
Right.
So it was and it was just me. There was no one else there, no other crew members. And I had my camera with me almost all the time. So they just got used to me and my camera.
Well, and I mean, I love how the film really did sort of, I mean, and like you said, try to sort of paint a picture of life on the island. Was it the person that you gravitated to, or was it the island? Like, because I'm just trying to find the mix of what it was. Because I mean, I was
Mhm.
fascinated in watching it. Just like I had almost forgotten Fogo Island existed, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know it existed until I learned about it in school through the NFB, because they had a rich history in terms of starting one of their programs on the island in the late 60s. And they actually helped to change how the fishing industry worked out there into a cooperative rather than a merchant system. But the reason why I was attracted to the island was when I worked there. And even as soon as you arrive there, it's this beautiful, magical place that feels completely trapped in time. Until you see a car pass by, it still feels like it's the 1800s. Not much has changed. Most people live in traditional salt box homes. Even a lot of the boats that they use are still like handmade. And then once I started working with these women at the inn, I was working in the restaurant, and most of the women I served with were born and raised on the island. I realized that life wasn't as picturesque or romantic as I had originally envisioned as the tourist who was there. And there hadn't really been any exploration of that, like of all this, the true, not just the salty Narnia representation of the island, but the actual perseverance that it takes to live there, especially in the winter,
Mm.
and particularly through women's eyes and kids' eyes, because the films that had been made there were completely focused on the fishing industry and the men who predominantly work in the industry.
Is there anything during the process that you learned that might have surprised you? Because I mean, I think it's like you said, there is a certain degree of, I guess, I mean, I don't want to say darkness because that feels like an overblown word, but like it's not like you say, it's not this necessarily going to be idyllic 100% of the time, and being sort of isolated
Mhm.
like they are can sort of make for, I guess, sort of well, I mean, mood wise, probably like a darker mood, just to sort of the population, I would imagine is probably the best way to describe it.
Um, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, a lot of people who live there work seasonally with the fishing industry. So that means during the winter, they're not working much. And yes, they have the internet, they have Netflix,
Yeah.
but there's not a ton of stuff to do. Like if you're an outdoorsy person, great, you can get on your skidoo, you can go hunting. But then there's a lot of days when the weather is too shitty that you don't really want to leave your house. So like the main events are really watching TV or socializing. And so, yes, a lot of people like uh, when I was staying with Sonya and Daniel, there would be different people over in the house all the time. But of course, like one of the main events in most places, rurally and definitely on the East Coast, is drinking. And so, we'd sit around and drink and chat. And I think that that can be perceived as darker, but Sonya would say that winter is like one of her favorite times of the year. um, so I hope that there's still like a sense of warmth that comes
Oh
across
no,
even in that
no, I absolutely,
portion of the film.
I no, I absolutely do think there is. But I mean, I think probably unintentionally, you've made a film that almost speaks to the pandemic isolation that we're in now. I mean, it's one of the, it gives it allows for sort of a really interesting level of understanding that there are places in the world where you're going to be dealing with this kind of isolation seasonally every year.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And there's definitely like a sense of boredom. Not that the community isn't great at like creating events for each other, but It's true, but the isolation is also, it's two-sided, right? Like it also brings a lot of freedom for these people, like that they can, um, their lives are so much more focused on where they live and not just things to keep them distracted. Like I find living in an urban environment, I'm on my phone a lot or at my computer or shopping a lot. Not, like there's just more things to do, movies, theaters to go to, etc. Where there, it's like you have to make entertainment for yourself. And so, yeah, they're probably better at isolating than the average Joe is, or more used to it mentally. Although I asked Sonia once when I was there in the winter, and I felt a little bit, what's the word? Claustrophobic
Right.
because
Okay.
the sea had totally frozen over, and there are times when you can't take the ferry to get off the island. It's quite regular in the winter. You have to wait a few days or sometimes weeks.
Yeah.
And I asked her, I was like, "Do you ever feel isolated?" And she was like, "God, no." Like she started laughing at me. Like, why would you feel like that? Like, look at all this freedom we have and space we have. And yeah.
Is there anything
And
you
right
learned?
now that,
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, please. No,
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 no.
no. I was just gonna say that their isolation, I mean, their life currently is very similar to their life pre-COVID. Luckily,
Right.
they've been very restrictive in terms of who comes on the island and limited COVID cases.
No,
None on the island so far.
for sure.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'm curious, during this filming process, is there anything you learned, not just about the filmmaking process, but maybe about yourself
Mm.
while you were sort of embedded with her and just sort of shooting and collecting footage?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I actually interviewed Sonya a lot, even though that's not used in the film. And it was more just I was trying to understand exactly her point of view. When we first met, I met so many people on the island who grew up there and loved their childhood, but then had that desire to leave and then went out to the rest of Canada and worked elsewhere, and then ultimately decided that they weren't happy and that they wanted to come home, even though home offered so many limited things. And it took me so long to understand why that was. I mean, like, I got it. It's a beautiful place. It's really hard not to fall in love with the place, and everybody's so friendly. But it still felt like um, maybe it could be limiting in some ways, or limiting in the ways that I was used to living. And eventually, what I learned was that this place provided a sense of identity that the suburbs that I grew up in definitely do not for me. That for Sonya, this place has taught her confidence and courage and resilience, and just through growing up on the land and sort of like the cultural traditions of what it means to be a Fogo Islander. um, and that's ultimately like why she came home. She wanted to provide that for her kids, and she wanted them to learn um, you know how to do conflict resolution with their friends, by building forts or having jobs at a young age that require patience, or getting on a boat when you're scared of the water and you don't know how to swim, and you're seeing you know the industry that makes your community thrive. And I instantly, at a certain point, I remember leaving her house after interviewing her for quite a while and driving back to where I was staying, and just feeling like there was this whole part of myself that was missing that I would never have because I didn't grow up with a community or culture that helped shape who I was. And
Right.
in this case, that culture community really was rooted in the land that they lived on.
For sure.
And that's what I learned for sure. Yeah.
No, and I mean, and that's a beautiful thing. And I mean, it's one of those things that we don't necessarily appreciate unless we sort of have to sort of be forced to think about it, and then we can really sort of let it sink in and let it sort of
Yeah.
simmer with us. It's one of those things that we need to sort of have put in front of our face to go, yeah, we need to appreciate that more. No, and I like how you do.
Absolutely.
Now, I mean, I'm
Sonia
curious.
told me,
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just a short story, but Sonia told me that when she was in university, one of her city peers, they call them townies,
Yeah.
um, said that she felt bad for Sonya that she grew up in a place with such limited resources. And Sonya just started laughing and she was like, "You have no idea what you missed by growing up in the city and like what I gained from where I lived." And she said that that her peer like just didn't get it. And she remembered looking at her professor and professor just totally understanding where she was coming from and like nodding at her. And it's true. It's like this really beautiful thing that I think a lot of urban folks don't understand or yeah need to spend time immersed in to really get, you know.
Now I'm curious, like when you were shooting, was there a moment when you knew you had a film, or is this the kind of thing that you sort of find in editing?
There were definitely a lot of stages to thinking that I had a film. I remember when I um, arrived the third time I was filming, and the boys were outside of the house, and they had this lawnmower, and they were trying to like cut the grass, not really grass, but a field essentially,
Yeah.
with this lawnmower, and it was going awry, and it looked like somebody was going to get hurt. And the way that they were talking to each other, it's very reminiscent of the scene where they are building the fort. It was that kind of vibe.
Right. Right. Okay.
And I remember thinking like, wow, if this happens every day, I'm definitely going to have a film. I don't know exactly what it will be, but there will be something. Just that the people were so charismatic and honest and authentic. And then the first time I really filmed for a long period of time was in the winter, and I thought I was done making the film then. It was going to be a short film. And then I started showing it to people and realized that it wasn't complete. It was just the beginning. And then yeah, there's so many stages because it is, an observational, mostly
Yeah.
observational film. Um, it really was like moving different scenes around and seeing how they would play off of each other. Um, and there were many stages where I thought like this is a piece of crap or it's not going anywhere or I don't think I have a film here. But that's kind of for me like the normal process of creating anything. There's always a stage where you kind of feel like you've hit rock bottom,
For sure.
and then you can kind of like check that off the list of accomplishments
Yeah.
and that things will get better if you just keep going. Um, but yeah, I think when Sonia probably agreed to be in the film, I knew that I would get something because I knew that she would be honest with me.
Well,
And
and you know,
yeah.
people want to know about people. I mean, and that's kind of the core of
Hmm.
storytelling. And I mean, I think you really sort of created something where you allowed us to sort of get to know these people really in an unvarnished way. And I
Hmm.
mean, I'm curious
Hmm.
because like you're being robbed of the traditional festival experience, but as your film gets out there to more audiences and more have more eyeballs on it, I'm kind of curious, what is your hope for the film?
I mean, it's exactly what you were just saying. Like, I want people to understand the realities of what this place is and what it means to grow up somewhere that shapes who you are.
Mm.
Um, and I want them to experience that for themselves. Like when I was a tourist there, I wanted to go in people's homes. I wanted to get on a boat and gut fish. I wanted to do all those things, but it's not something that you can easily do and it's not often shown to people. So I wanted to give people that opportunity and then to also understand the nuances and the actualities of living somewhere as far away as Fogo Island.
Mm.
And eventually, like as I was crafting more, applications for funding, I started realizing that I probably want a lot of urban folk to watch the film and to think about what it means to grow up rurally in a different way and to appreciate and understand that with a new perspective.
Well, I think you've done that and then some because it's a beautiful film. And just
Thank you,
congratulations again. And
David.
thank you so much for the time today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
All
Really
right.
appreciate it.
No
It's
problem.
it's definitely a weird feeling making a film all on your own and then putting it out during a pandemic all alone in your house. So it's great to
And
hear
you're
other
getting the
people's
feed now you're
thoughts on
finally
it.
getting feedback, right? It must be so
Yeah.
rewarding.
It's slowly starting to feel rewarding, that's for sure.
Well, I'm glad. And again, thank you so much for the time. This was a lot of fun. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.